Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before the interval break, we were speaking about salat and about the importance of salat as a dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the issues that we face in the modern world today, where there are too many distractions away from salat. And due to pressure from society and peer pressure, many of us may be inclined away from prayer, and we may feel some kind of shame in praying 5 times a day. Then maybe we'll be seen as some kind of extremist or fundamentalist, and we don't want to give that picture. But no, this is the prayer is the thing that separates us from the non-Muslims. You see, it's as from the words of the Ma'sumin alayhimus salatu wassalam, the thing that distinguishes us from the non-Muslims, the primal thing is the prayer. The Prophet of Allah, Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, "Inna dhakira fil ghafilin kal muqatili fil farin." That the one who does a dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he is surrounded by those who are neglectful of Allah, is surrounded by those who are ghafil. He is like the one who is fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is surrounded by people who are running away. And we know who were those who were running away in the battle of Uhud and Hunayn and other battles. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to be put in that group, or do we want to be put in the group of those Shia and the followers of the Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt who stood steadfast in battle and were steadfast when other people ran away? This is just a question that we need to ask ourselves, and that we can be those who run away, but then in the Day of Judgment we should have no claim to Islam. We should have no claim to being the followers of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. And due to the shortage of time, I'd like to move on to some of the masail of the prayer. And I believe the phone lines will be opened soon, so any questions are welcomed in respect to the prayer, salat. The first thing I'd like to speak about is before the prayer, the adhan and the iqama are one of those ibadat which have been heavily emphasized by the Sharia, by the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, by the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alih. There is so much reward for, even if you are alone, if you are praying alone in your house, if you recite the adhan and the iqama, there is so much reward for you. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam said, "Innaka idha adhanta wa aqamta صلى خلفك صفان من الملائكة وإن أقمت إقامة بغير أذان صلى خلفك صف واحد." That if you stand up to prayer and you recite the adhan and the iqama before the prayer, you will have 2 rows of angels praying behind you. You will be the imam for the congregational prayers, consisted solely of yourself and the angels. وَإِنْ أَقَمْتَ إِقَامَةً بِغَيْرِ أَذَانٍ. But if you forego the adhan and you just recite the iqama, still that has so much reward that behind you you have a jama'at of 1 row of angels. This is the level of emphasis that Allah has given for the adhan and the iqama. So we should make it a practice that at least recite the iqama for every prayer that we offer, particularly those which are wajib. Then the first step in the prayer is the takbiratul ihram. It is called the takbir because we are saying Allahu Akbar, and is called takbiratul ihram because through it, just as one wears the ihram and enters a state of ihram before Hajj or Umrah, he cannot come out of that state until he has finished the manasik, the minimum manasik. Thereafter he can come out of the state of ihram. Similarly, when we recite Takbiratul Ihram, we say Allahu Akbar and we raise our hands with the niyyah in our minds. We have entered this pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this state of ihram, where we can no longer, particularly if it's an obligatory prayer, we cannot leave the prayer until it is finished. The first act in the prayer is a takbir, and then the prayer ends with the salam, the taslim, when we say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh at the end of the prayer, and that's when the prayer ends. And many people, Arabs and non-Arabs alike, they need to focus on the recitation of anything that we recite, the words that we recite in the prayer. For example, Allahu Akbar is a very simple term made up of two words, and it's very common amongst the Muslim community, but we hear people saying Allahu Akbar with a waw, or any other kind of changes in the form. This isn't sufficient. One has to say in a very clear way, Allahu Akbar, reciting each and every letter of these two words clearly and succinctly, so that it is pure in the way you are reciting it. Allahu Akbar, with the alif, kaf, ba and ra, Akbar. There's no wow in there. You won't say Allahu Akbar. This is wrong. This isn't dhikr. This isn't anything. And then we have some rawayat from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Also, the same is narrated from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Said, "Iftitahu salat al-wudu." The introduction to the salat, the preamble to the salat is the wudu. وَتَحْرِيمُهَا التَّكْبِيرُ, and you enter the prayer, the sanctity of the prayer, in which one is prohibited from leaving the prayer through the takbir. وَتَحْلِيلُهَا التَّسْلِيمُ, and the way that one leaves the prayer and exits the prayer is through the taslim, when you say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And the Aimma alayhimus salatu wassalam have explained to us how to recite the takbir, and they have emphasized the fact that we should raise our hands with our fingers adjoined and our thumbs apart, and raising the hands to the level of the ears, in this way facing the qibla. Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam said, or the narrator said, that the Imam started his prayer, فَرَفَعَ يَدَيْهِ حَيَالَ وَجْهِهِ وَاسْتَقْبَلَ الْقِبْلَ بِبَطْنِ كَفَّيْهِ, that he raised his hands while saying takbir and he faced the palms of his hands towards qibla. So we see many people reciting like this, or in different various ways, but the way that the Imam have showed us is the best way is to face the palms of the hand towards qibla. And then we move on to the qira'at of the Holy Quran, where we recite Surah Al-Fatiha, and then we recite another short surah of the Holy Quran. And it's very important again to learn to recite these verses of the Holy Quran in the proper, correct manner. Because if anything is missing from such a recitation, you will risk having your prayer become batil, because you haven't recited the Fatiha, without which there is no salat. Because Aimma alayhimu salatu wassalam said, La salata illa bi fatihatil kitab, for example. There is no salat except with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. And if you're reciting it incorrectly, then it is as if you haven't recited it. So there is no Surah Al-Fatiha, therefore there is no salat. So it's very important for you to recite the surahs properly. And that goes with all the adhkar, everything that we recite during the prayer. And there is a very important issue which I wish to discuss in this short time. Hopefully, inshallah, we have enough time to go through a number of masail today. There are 3 prayers from the 5 prayers in which we must recite the surah Surah Al-Fatiha and the other surah in an audible voice, what we call in Arabic bil jahr. We recite it not quietly or whispering it, we should recite it in an audible way. This is wajib. Many people we see around are not doing this. Why? Maybe for whatever the reason is. If a person knows that this is wajib in the prayer, and this is written in all the books of Islamic laws, all the Tawdihul Masails of all the fuqaha, there is no issue, there is no ikhtilaf amongst the fuqaha, the mujtahideen, in the fact that in the prayers of Fajr, Maghrib and Isha, one has to recite in the first two rakats Surah Al-Fatiha and the second surah in an audible way. This is just for gents. I want to make it clear, this is just for gents. Women have a choice. They may recite it audibly or inaudibly as a whisper. Whatever the case is, it has to be recited. And for men, it must be recited audibly. For Dhuhr and Asr prayers, the men must recite Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim in an audible way, and then the rest of the surah must be recited in a whisper, in a low, quiet voice. And this is very clear. This isn't something which the nitpicky rules of Islam, which the fuqaha have made up just to make things difficult. This is from the Aimma alayhimus salatu was salam. For example, there is one riwayah from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam narrated by his companion Zurara. Somebody asked about a man who recited loud when he had to recite quietly, or a man who recited quietly when he had to recite aloud in an audible way. He said, أي ذلك فعل متعمدا فقد نقض صلاته وعليه الإعادة. That whoever does this intentionally, having known that this is the rule of Islam, the rule of the prayer, and despite this fact he goes against the ruling, so where he needs to recite audibly, he doesn't recite it audibly, his salat is batil and he has to repeat the prayer. So this is very, very important. There is no shame in reciting the prayer audibly. There is no reason for one to be embarrassed if you are reciting it audibly or other people will hear you. This isn't something that you should be worried about. What you should be worried about is that the prayer is performed correctly before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to the Sharia as taught by the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu was salam. Another issue is in ruku'. When we bow down and we say Subhana Rabbiyal Azimi wa bihamdi, or we say Subhanallah 3 times, or we say both, and it's mustahab to also recite the salawat on the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi and his al, we then have to raise our heads into a standing position. And some brothers, sisters may raise their head slightly and go directly to the sajda. This is incorrect. One has to raise himself to a level which he is standing and his knees are locked and he's standing straight, and then he can go down to sajda. And then while he is standing, it's then very highly recommended for him to say Sami Allahu liman hamida, and then recite the takbir and then go down to sajda. But it's important for us to stand up straight after ruku'. And this is, for example, expressed by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He said, قال إذا رفعت رأسك من الركوع فأقم صلبك فإنه لا صلاة لمن لا يقيم صلبه. That if you have raised your heads from ruku', straighten your backs, because unless you straighten your backs after ruku', there is no salat. Your salat is batil. These are heavy words. These small things can affect the prayer to such a level that it's as if you haven't prayed at all. In the same way, when we go down to the sajda, in every rak'at there are two sajdas, there are two prostrations. We take our heads down to the ground once, we say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la wa bihamdi, or Subhanallah 3 times, or even better both. Recommended also is to recite the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, and then we raise our heads. When we raise our heads, we have to ensure that we are sitting with tuma'ananiya, with some semblance of sitting. We have sat up straight, and then we go down again. And then it is also recommended to say Astaghfirullah Rabbi wa atubu ilayh, and also the takbir when you raise your head, and then when you sit up, you say Allahu Akbar, then you say istighfar, and then you say Allahu Akbar again, and then you go back to the sitting position. But after this, where many people falter, is when they raise their heads again. If they need to go up, stand up again for the next rak'at, it is important for everybody to sit for a moment after the sajda. He has to sit first, and then he says bihawlillahi wa quwwatihi aqumu wa aq'ud, and he raises himself up to the standing position. It is important to sit for even just a moment after the second sajda. He shouldn't raise himself immediately from the prostration to the standing position, because that will make the prayer incorrect. And in this respect, we have many riwayat from the Aimma alayhim salatu wassalam. For example, from Al-Asbagh ibn Nabata, he narrates from Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he said, كان أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام إذا رفع رأسه من السجود قعد حتى يطمئن ثم يقوم. That when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam used to raise his head from the second sajda before he stood up for the next unit, for the next rak'ah, he used to sit in a way that, he used to sit first contently with tama'nina, and then he would raise himself to stand. And then it was asked, فَقِيلَ لَهُ يَا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كَانَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ أَبُو بَكَرَ وَعُمَرَ إِذَا رَفَعُوا رُؤُوسَهُم مِنَ السُّجُودِ نَهَضُوا عَلَى صُدُورِ أَقْدَامِهِمْ كَمَا تَنْهَضُ الْإِبِلُ. That before you, the khulafa before you, when they used to pray and used to raise their heads after the second sajda, they used to get on their feet immediately. And this is the way they raise themselves for the next rak'ah, to the standing position. But you do not do it in this way. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, what is this that you do? فَقَالَ أَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ. He responded, إِنَّمَا يَفْعَلُ ذَلِكَ أَهْلُ الْجَفَاءِ مِنَ النَّاسِ إِنَّ هَذَا مِنْ تَوْقِيرِ الصَّلَاةِ. The way other people have been practicing it is the way that the people of Jafar do these kind of acts, where they act with irreverence, they act curtly and roughly. This is their manner of prayer. The manner of the prayer for the Muslimin, for the righteous Muslimin and the Mu'mineen, is the way that I have raised myself for the next rak'at, where you sit contently for a moment and then you raise yourself up. Inna hadha min tawqir as-salat. This is the way that you give your prayer some kind of reverence, some kind of respect. This is the way the prayer should be recited. And Imam Sadiq alayhi salam has also narrated something on the similar lines. إذا رفعت رأسك من السجدة الثانية من الركعة الأولى حين تريد أن تقوم فاستوي جالسا ثم قم. That when you want to raise your head, from the second sajda, from the first rak'ah, which is a rak'ah in which one has to stand up after the prayer, after the second sajda. So in that rak'ah, one should first sit, take a sitting position, be content in that position and be settled in that position, and then stand. This is the way the Aimma alayhimus salatu wassalam have taught us how to pray in the most perfect manner. Then there are many other issues that come up into prayer. For example, the ahkam of jama'ah, congregational prayers, the ahkam of the doubts of prayers, the things which, those doubts and those errors in the prayer which make the prayer batil, void, and those which you can ignore and those which you cannot ignore, but there are remedies so that you don't have to repeat the prayer. There's many ahkam that we all need to learn. Why? Because this is our dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a dhikr of Allah which He has made wajib upon us, through which we can purify ourselves. We can attain those heights that Allah wishes for us, the heights of taqwa and closeness and proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are other questions raised about, for example, the congregational prayers, or the prayer, how to pray in an airplane, or different ahkam about how to offer Jum'ah prayers, Friday prayers, and various other things. And inshallah we will discuss these issues in the following segments of this series of Islamic laws. And many of us go to the mosque to pray, and or to the local Islamic center to pray, and the prayer is held in congregation, and the reward for congregational prayers, for the prayers of Jama'ah, are so huge that they are incomprehensible for us. If there are more than 10 people in a congregation, the numbers are just too staggering for us to comprehend about how the rewards of our prayers are multiplied by so many fold. And there are certain rulings for the congregational prayers, where you can enter a congregational prayer. First of all, one of the principles of the congregational prayer, the prayer of Jama'ah, is that the Imam has to be reciting a prayer which is faridah, which is wajib, which is obligatory. And that one is also reciting a prayer which is obligatory on him. There is no congregational prayer except examples like Salatul Eid nowadays, but generally speaking, if you have a mustahab prayer, you cannot recite it in congregation. And if the Imam is offering a recommended prayer, a mustahab prayer, you cannot go behind him to recite your wajib prayer. That cannot happen. For this reason, the nawafil of Shahr Ramadan, what is commonly known or come to be known amongst our brothers in the sect of Ahl Sunnah, they believe, they perform their prayers in congregation, but in reality the congregational prayers cannot be recited in this way because they are mustahab. They should be recited in an individual way, in the mosques or at home. And this is according to the teachings of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, which is very clear from the ahadith. So that being the first issue. The second issue, where can one enter the Jama'ah? The Jama'ah, you can only enter the Jama'ah while the Imam is either reciting the two surahs, while he's standing and he's reciting the two surahs after the Takbiratul Ihram, or when he's descended into ruku'. When he's gone to the state of ruku', he's bowed down, you can still join that prayer, and that unit, that rak'ah, will be counted as your first rak'ah. With the condition that you join him, you say Allahu Akbar once, and you say Allahu Akbar again to go into ruku', and you can, the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha and the other surah is foregone for you, is waived for you. You can go directly into ruku to join with the Imam, as long as the Imam hasn't raised his head from ruku before you have entered ruku. So it's important to understand this, that this is where you enter the prayer of Jama'ah. The other miscomprehension some people may have, and I have been asked this question recently, that every person has to recite his prayer in the manner that is obligated for him. If one is reciting Maghrib prayer and he enters the prayer of the Jama'ah while they are in the Isha prayer, one will finish his prayer in the third rak'at. He will not continue with them. And if a person wishes to recite, for example, the Isha prayer, and he joins with the Jama'ah, which is also reciting the Jama'ah prayer, one has missed a rak'ah or two rak'ah, or he's at the end of the prayer and he joins them in the third or fourth rak'ah, or the second rak'ah. One has to complete his prayer, and he shouldn't finish the prayer when the Imam is finishing it, because he still has some rak'at to fulfill. For example, if one joins the Isha prayer in the third rak'ah of the Jama'ah, he needs to perform the two rak'at with the Jama'at, and then he shouldn't end the prayer with the Jama'at. He should continue to offer two more rak'at so that his Isha is completed. The other issue is that in Jama'ah, in the prayers of Fajr, Maghrib and Isha, the person who is following the Imam, the person behind the Imam in the congregation, shouldn't recite Surah Al-Fatiha or the second surah during that. He should listen to the Imam and he should remain silent. This is for the first two rak'at of any prayer. Then there are many other issues. The purpose of these sessions is not just to go through every single step and stage of the ibadat and the rules of the Sharia and respect for everything. I'd like to be able to remind myself and everybody listening about the value of those ibadat, about the prayer, the practicalities of it, and about the philosophy behind it and the hikmah behind it, and to understand how it can benefit us spiritually, how it can take us to the next level in our life, in the journey of our life. And in this way we will then, if we gain greater appreciation for salat and tahara and saum and hajj and zakat and all the ibadat and all the mu'amalat as well, we will have that urge and that inclination inside us to learn the ahkam, to learn those rulings of Islam, because they are everywhere. I mentioned this last week as well, that we have no excuse left. We should learn. The books are all available online, whether they are summarized books of how to pray or whether they are detailed books of how to pray. Everything is available with pictures, with audio, with videos. It's all available. It's just a matter of taking some time out of our lives and giving it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who has given you everything, who has sustained you since you were born, since you were created, and has provided for you. And He will inshallah reward you for this effort that you exert in getting to know the ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ahkam of the Sharia, for which the Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wassalam sacrificed their time, their wealth, their lives for. May Allah grant us the tawfiq to continue along this line of learning about Islam, because we are all students of Islam, and we have to understand that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called us all the strivers towards and seekers of knowledge. Talabul ilm wajib ala kulli muslimin, is wajib upon all of us. And with that, I would like to pray for all of us that we continue to learn more and more. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.